Good morning, eighth graders. Let's do our last lecture about chapter 30, which is our last chapter of the book. Mostly about Reagan and Carter, and then maybe I'll do a little follow up about the rest of the story. Reagan was elected in 1980, like I said in a previous lecture. His goal was to raise military spending to force the Soviet Union to try to keep up, which they weren't able to. He was very conservative. Reagan was very conservative, very patriotic. He was a great communicator because he had been an actor. He had a funny sense of humor, and overall, he was probably the best president of my lifetime. One of the probably 10 or 12 greatest presidents in American history. Um, Anyhow, he did succeed in when ultimately his policies won the Cold War. The very beginning of his presidency, we plunged into a recession. He had to struggle a little bit with that. That lasted about a half a year or something like that, about 1983. Nancy and I were living in Colorado at the time. And 1985, a new Soviet president came to power. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev. His policy was perestroika, which is restructuring of the economics of the Soviet Union, and glasnost, which was more openness for the Soviet Union. So Reagan, although took a really hard line against the communists, he actually became friends with Gorbachev. They met several times, and Gorbachev really legitimately was a decent guy. He tried to have better relations with the United States. Unfortunately for the communists, they weren't able to keep up with the United States as far as our spending. Now, of course, he cut taxes and then increased spending, so that led to a pretty steep deficit, at least for back then. Today it's nothing, but back then it was quite a bit. So a lot of people were opposed to that. Reagan was reelected in 1984 overwhelmingly in a landslide. He had a very hard line policy against communist countries here in the Western Hemisphere. Nicaragua had a revolution, and their leader, Daniel Ortega, was basically a socialist communist. So the CIA organized a counter-revolution against the Sandinistas, which were the communists in Nicaragua. And so the Contras, as they were called, were trained and sent to Nicaragua or were trained down in Nicaragua to fight the Sandinistas. So that was a bloody civil war. There was a bloody civil war in El Salvador with death squads and everything. We sided with the people who had the death squads, unfortunately. The little island of Grenada, we invaded to throw the Cubans out. There had been a revolution in the island of Grenada, and so we sent troops to get rid of the Cubans. And Haiti, well, that was later on. But anyhow, it showed that Reagan was willing to use military force. There was a little bit of a scandal. The arms for hostages business, supplying arms to the Contras. Congress had passed a law that said not to do that, and Reagan, at least people in the Reagan administration, had ignored it. And Reagan never got in trouble for it because he basically said, well, I didn't really know what was going on, And he got away with it because he was such a friendly guy and everybody liked him, so he kind of got away with it. 1988, there was another election. Vice President George H.W. Bush was elected president to continue Reagan's policies, and Bush made the mistake of saying, read my lips, no new taxes. He promised not to raise taxes. And he was a popular president. He was probably the second best president in my lifetime. I liked H.W. Bush. He was a good man. Well, in the Middle East, a guy by the name of Saddam Hussein, you maybe heard of him. He had been fighting a war for a lot of years against Iran and lost a lot of people. Well, in the end, it was sort of a draw between the two. Well, he wanted to control more of the Persian Gulf, but in order to do that, he had to take over the country of Kuwait. And so in 1990, he launched an invasion of Kuwait, captured Kuwait, occupied it, brutal occupation. And George H.W. Bush told him to get out or else. Well, the United Nations Security Council actually sided with us, including the Russians and the Chinese. They sided with us to get rid of Saddam Hussein, kick him out of Kuwait. So the United States organized a coalition of a bunch of different countries to fight in what became known as the Persian Gulf War, or the Gulf War. And in February, we launched a massive air campaign to bombard Iraq. And then we launched a ground offensive the end of February of 1991, which was over within a week. We crushed the Iraqi army with a minimum amount of casualties. We decided not to capture Baghdad, but we drove Saddam Hussein's army out of Iraq. And Hussein never completely recovered from that. He would try later on to do some stuff, but in the end, it was a glorious victory. George H.W. Bush's popularity rose higher than any president in my lifetime. It was like 70, 80% popularity after that. The hero of the war was a guy named General Norman Schwarzkopf. I got to meet him shopping in a Costco in Spokane, Washington one time. I saw him there and I recognized him, so I went up and said hi to him, shook hands with him, talked to him for a little bit. Got his autograph for my son Shannon's baby book. Back then, Shannon was just a baby. But so I actually met the guy who was he was the commander of all of the forces that were, all the United Nations forces and stuff. So he was a pretty important guy. So I got to meet him. That was pretty cool. Really nice guy. Now, the problem for Bush was 1992 was another election, and right before the election, we plunged into a pretty bad recession. Needless to say, Bush and the Republicans got blamed for the recession. So in 1992, the person who was elected president was the former governor of Arkansas. His name was William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton, and his lovely wife, Hillary. And so Bill and Hillary Clinton took charge of the Oval Office in January of 1993, and he was sort of an oh shucks kind of guy, but he was popular. He was young. He was kind of like Kennedy in a way, in more ways than one, as it turned out. And so he took over, and there was, by the way, in 1992, there was another man who ran for president. His name was Ross Perot. He was an old Texas billionaire. And he ran on the campaign of balancing the budget. He said, our federal deficit is getting too high. We need to balance the budget. And he had a really heavy Texas accent. He was kind of funny to watch. And he actually took a lot of votes away from Bush. He hated Bush. And so he took a lot of votes away from Bush. And it helped elect Clinton. So Clinton took over, very popular. Needless to say, he was more of a liberal. Hillary was put in charge of health care. She tried to pass a national health care program so that everybody could have health care, but Congress shot it down. They wouldn't do it. And so that was going to have to wait until Obama came along. Trying to think of some of the other stuff that took place. Clinton wasn't afraid to get involved in things. He sent peacekeeping troops into Haiti. He also sent peacekeeping troops into Somalia, into Mogadishu. And if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, it didn't work out very well for the Americans. Several Americans were killed, and the United States had to withdraw our troops ultimately from Somalia. It was a failure. But Clinton continued to try to maintain good relations with the rest of the world. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, December of 1991. When Bush was still president, and all those countries that were part of the Soviet Union became free, independent nations. China, however, did not, the communism didn't collapse. There was a brutal massacre of people in Tiananmen Square. Maybe up to 6,000 to 10,000 people were killed, or hundreds and hundreds were arrested and stuff. And so the communists clamped down in China, but they lost power in Russia, in the Soviet Union. Bill Clinton passed the Family Leave Act, which helped Nancy and I when Shannon was a baby. It's the only time I've ever voted for a Democrat for president was in 1996. I voted for Clinton because he actually helped me. But unfortunately, right after he was reelected in 1996, it was revealed that he had a not so not so nice affair, you might say, sexual affair with Monica Lewinsky, one of the young White House interns. Congress investigated Congress in 1994. The Republicans took over Congress, so they began investigating him. And he said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," and he lied because he had. And so, as a result of that, they decided to get him on perjury, which is lying to Congress or lying to a court, and they impeached him. Of course, he was not taken out of office. He didn't lose, his position as president, but he became the second president to be impeached. 92, 96, the year 2000, there was an election that took place. And George W. Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush, was the Republican candidate. Al Gore, the vice president for Clinton, ran on the Democrats. And it was the most contentious election of my lifetime. It came down to the state of Florida. It was dead even. Came down to the state of Florida. Whoever took Florida got all the electoral votes from Florida. And it dragged on into December, over a month. They bickered over who had won the state of Florida. Well, in the end, the Supreme Court ruled that George Bush had won Florida. So he was elected president because of more electoral votes. But Al Gore actually had, I think, about 500,000 more popular votes. And we've been messed up ever since. The Democrats never got over that. And then, so they were ticked off at George W. Bush for his entire presidency. He entered with, real positive, but a few months later, September 11th, 2001, the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, attacked the Twin Towers, attacked New York, 9/11, and that was going to take the rest of Bush's presidency. His main goal was to fight terrorism. We invaded Afghanistan, drove out the Taliban, or took over there and pushed them back. We hunted for Al-Qaeda. We hunted for Osama bin Laden. Didn't get him until Obama was elected president. Bush was kind of an insecure kind of a man. He wasn't very popular. I voted for him twice. He was reelected in the year 2004 and finished his term in 2008. And then it seemed like Hillary Clinton was going to be the Democratic candidate. But along came a senator from Illinois by the name of Barack Obama, and he upset Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primaries and became the Democratic candidate. He, of course, was elected president in 2008, took office January 2009. And Obama promised to open up health care to the entire country. So by the year 2010, Congress had passed the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which everybody calls the Obamacare, so that everybody has access to health care. Obama was a very popular president. I did not like him because he's one of the only presidents that directly hurt my family with his policies. As a result of Obamacare, the cost of my health care skyrocketed. The premiums shot up. And I haven't really completely forgiven him since. However, he did send me a personal letter. I have it hanging on the wall signed by him, which is pretty cool because I had sent him a letter that a student had left for me on my desk, and he was impressed by it. So he wrote me a personal letter. So I got to say the guy's classy. I didn't agree with a lot of his policies, but he was a classic guy. He was reelected, obviously, in 2012. And finished his term as one of the more popular presidents in my lifetime. Probably one of the better Democratic presidents. Clinton, although Clinton had a lot of affairs with a lot of women in his lifetime, the fact was that during his presidency, the economy was good. And 2008, the economy collapsed for a while, and a combination of George Bush and Barack Obama's stimulus plans helped save the economy. So that's about all the time I have to talk right now. So that's kind of a brief summary of Chapter 30 and beyond. Okay, so you guys be good, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.